Interesting day with Safaricom announcing its first half financial results for the full year 2019 and 2020. Net earnings are up 14.4%. We are taking a deep dive, talking to different people during the investor briefing. Joined with us at this point in time is Mrs. Tracy Kivunyu. She is a senior telecoms analyst at Tellimer. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on these numbers?
It was a decent set of numbers considering the circumstances in the year. Obviously, we saw some bit of weakness coming in from gaming revenue.
Okay.
And there was also a lot of competitive pressure coming in from Airtel, who've been very aggressive in the market in terms of pricing.
Okay.
That said, there was more than expected weakness in revenue from voice and SMS, but we're also slightly surprised by the upside in OPEX intensity in the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean by OPEX intensity?
By OPEX intensity, I'm talking about the proportion of cost to revenue. So we're seeing that coming off, meaning that Safaricom is getting more profitable year on year.
Oh, interesting. But then there was a divergence. The bottom line, 14.4% growth, but then the top line, the revenue was only up 5.3% growth.
Yes.
How do we reconcile these numbers?
It's more about the dynamics of the revenue growth proportion. A lot of the revenue growth is still coming from the mobile money side of the business. And looking at how the mobile money side of the business has transformed to the new business side, that means less agency commissions. So what you're seeing is a revenue stream that is growing stronger with lower costs.
With lower costs.
Yeah.
So they're paying less to the distributor network?
Yes.
And then they're relying more on just engaging directly with the consumers?
Correct.
Okay, so then what are your expectations? So 5.3% growth with regards to the top line. Is that a number that we expect to see? Do we go back to the higher teens lower teens, or what happens with these numbers?
I would say 6 to 7% growth would be what to expect over this term, because the competitive pressure is only going to get worse once Airtel and Telcom merge. So we don't expect voice and SMS to do any differently. Mobile data might actually come under further pressure post the merger. So the only revenue growth we can speak of right now is M-Pesa, because that's largely protected.
So M-Pesa could potentially be protected. But what's driving M-Pesa today?
M-Pesa is still being driven by a traditional P2P side, but also
person to person.
Yeah, person to person.
Sending money to you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also the new business side, where you're sending money from your bank to a customer or to another person.
Yes.
So those have been the two strongest revenue streams. They're now trying to also grow the merchant payment side. So those are the factors that we'll be looking for M-Pesa growth in the near term.
What about Fuliza?
Yes, Fuliza has actually done quite well. We're expecting 1.7 billion for the full year, and they've delivered 1.3 billion.
Is this in profitability or loans that have been extended?
No, this is in profitability.
Profitability.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a highly profitable platform.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you look at how they structure it, it's a 1% transaction fee one-off.
Yes.
And then a 1% charge daily till when you repay the loan.
Okay.
So considering they take about 3 days to repay the loan, you're talking about 4% charge on the transaction value. That's why it's wildly.
And then the turnover is also it's pretty steep.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we should all do Fuliza rather than running a bank and having all that to sit on all that operational expenditure.
That is very true.
Okay, very interesting. When you talk about the merger, I like that you're bringing about the element of competitive threats to the different revenue lines that Safaricom has. But the key thing that we keep hearing is spectrum. And Safaricom has been very adamant and come out strongly saying that if this merger goes ahead, the spectrum allocation will not be proportionate to market share. What are your views on that?
I'll be very concerned by that, because Airtel is largely able to maintain its network quality because it has a lower level of subscribers on its platform compared to Safaricom.
Yes.
So it invests less. If it gets more spectrum, then it would mean that they have even more leeway to continue with that strategy of pricing aggressively without compromising network quality.
Yes.
So they will essentially be a stronger competitor with lower costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's a huge risk, because Tracy, what you're telling me is if the Airtel and Telcom merger goes ahead, you'll have a huge empty bucket, and then Safaricom will continue with a filled bucket. Isn't it only natural for people to leave the Safaricom network for the same offering and go to this new merged entity?
It is, but we cannot also ignore the network effect of M-Pesa.
Yes.
So I would say that the regulatory network would also, the regulatory framework
Yes.
will have a lot of say as to how that dynamic will play.
All right.
So if we are still talking about regulations where M-Pesa is to be separated from the traditional telco, then that really
Then that
decimates the
becomes,
opportunity for Safaricom.
Okay.
But as long as M-Pesa is there, I would expect a bit of stickiness with the subscriber.
So it feels like regulatory risk is a key risk to look out here.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow, if we wake up and we have seen Parliament has been making, has made decisions, and they come as a surprise to us. So tomorrow, if we wake up and Safaricom is a separate entity, the next day we wake up, Telcom and Airtel have merged, then there's no longer any value in Safaricom, or at less, depending on what remains actually listed on the stock exchange.
Yeah. So for me, if we're looking at such a scenario,
yes,
I would be directing all the opportunities towards the mobile money segment, because even as we speak now, that's where all the profit seems to be coming from.
It's no longer coming from.
Yeah, so I would expect
traditional
investors to make a similar decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Improvement with regards to the margins. It's about, I think, 2% improvement in earnings before interest and tax margin.
Yeah.
What's happening there? Are they cutting back costs? Are they? What's really going on with that?
It's related to the continued investment in capex.
Okay.
So what they've been trying to do is get their network 4G ready, and as we saw today, 4G network coverage is at 63%. So what that does is that it makes it cheaper to run the network.
Yes.
So the network costs have largely remained flat.
All right.
So
great.
that's why we're seeing that
Okay.
improvement in margins.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, good numbers, a couple of risk factors about. What are you telling investors to do? The price is shy of 30 shillings
Yeah.
by a few cents.
Yeah.
What are you telling investors to do at this price level?
For me, I think the valuation is right. It's at its intrinsic value. My valuation is at 30 shillings. So
Okay.
for now, I'm saying hold. For an investor who has been holding the stock for a while, it would be a good time to lighten some of
Okay.
it and take some profit.
All right.
And maybe come back at around 27 shillings.
Come back at about 27 shillings.
Yeah.
So good numbers, but then it's fairly priced at this point in time.
Yeah.
Anything over 30, really, you should be selling and not buying into this stock.
Correct.
Is there anything else that we need to consider in light of these numbers that have come out?
Not really, but I would say another opportunity to look out for, of course, would be the movement into Ethiopia.
Okay.
It's encouraging to hear that they're moving into voice and data, not just mobile money.
Yes.
I think that's a huge opportunity for them.
Okay.
So it will be a dynamic of also trying to understand what cash flows will be required to
Exactly.
realize that opportunity, and how the regulatory framework there will also inform the opportunity in Ethiopia.
Okay.
Yeah.
But free cash flows are declining, not by a material sum, but there is some slight decline. Do they have sufficient funds to be able to go heavy into Ethiopia?
As at last year, we're talking about $100 million in cash flows.
Okay.
So not too worried about cash flow constraints.
Yes.
The movement this year was more of seasonality with capex requirements. So
All right.
we'd expect that to normalize at the end of the year. But looking at the fact that they would need to acquire a license,
Yes.
they might need to take up some debt. But considering their debt to capital is at 3%,
Okay.
there's a lot of room to take
So there's
more
a lot
debt.
of headroom in
Yeah.
that regard.
Yeah.
And maybe the final question, I mean, a while back we had met with the regulators just to understand what is happening. And I think there's, maybe next year, there's word of a potential auction of another license. Is that something that Safaricom would take? Would they be able to afford if maybe the regulator came and said, now we are auctioning a 5G license? Would they be able to do that?
The market is not necessarily ready right now for
Okay.
5G.
Yes.
Considering we're still talking about some of the areas in the country at 2G.
At 2G,
So I
okay.
would be surprised if Safaricom is willing at this time to move into 5G.
All right.
What I would expect them to do, though, is to maybe get more spectrum.
Get more spectrum.
Yeah.
How do they get more spectrum, Tracy?
It is a matter of the Communications Authority, unfortunately.
It's really
They
out
do
of
want
their
more
hands.
spectrum, but
Yes.
the regulator will dictate that. And of
Okay.
course, the cost.
All right, so
Yeah.
a couple of risk factors, but there's still headroom for improvement, but they've certainly done a good job. So wait and see. It's already fairly priced at this point in time.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mrs. Tracy Kivunyu Mose, for your time. There you have it. Some very good numbers, a bit of weakness with regards to some of the revenue lines, but then overall good numbers. At 30 shillings or near about 30 shillings, it is fairly priced. If you want to be buying this stock, you probably need to wait for a correction downwards towards 27 shillings. If you want to wait for the rally, maybe you should consider lightening some of your stocks at about the 32 level. Thank you for joining us once again. This is Markets Today, and I'm your host, Bitha Mwema. Good afternoon.